You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip. With Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we're looking at OJ, the All-American Media Event. And now, here's Arthur.
And thank you very much, Mike. And today, guys, we're going to be talking about something that happened 31 years ago. Incredible, as it may seem. We're going to be talking about OJ Simpson and all the things that happened in that period that began on June 12, 1994, and ran for actually more than a year in terms of a trial and all the happenings. I happened to live in Brentwood at that time, maybe 2 blocks away from where the murder took place. And the only reason I mention that is because living there, we then participated, in a sense, in all of the things that occurred afterwards, like helicopters constantly flying over our area, and not being able to really go to the supermarket down on Wilshire Boulevard because of the traffic and police cars and God knows what. And that lasted for a long time. The TV cameras were locked in to the murder situation for weeks. They were just right across the street. But having lived there, and Steve was in the vicinity, and Julian had lived somewhat in the area some years before, we're familiar with the logistics of what took place. But this is, we're going to talk about OJ Simpson here, and who was born in 1947, died in 2024, came out of jail. He was finally arrested. But the happening that happened was really unbelievable. He was a guy who was one of the top probably 5 running backs in the history of football. He was an All-American at USC. He went and then played for the Buffalo Bills. And in my opinion, as a sports fan, I would say he's the second greatest running back of all time, second to Jim Brown, who I believe was the first. Anyway, he's certainly considered one of the greatest running backs of all time. And he had glamour. He's a very good-looking guy, and he had a career in movies. And he was a big celebrity. Hertz cars, yes, Steve.
Well, speaking of Hertz cars, I mean, he was running through airports on national television every night on those commercials. He was a very likable character. I remember seeing him in the movies. He plays a security guard in The Towering Inferno. He rescues a cat. He's in Capricorn 1. He plays an astronaut. I always thought he was a very likable, and he's also was playing in comic movies too. He was in those Naked Gun movies. He was very funny in those. Before the murder, I would have to say he was probably one of the most likable personalities, sports, films, etc., in America. I think that contributed to the fascination. How could that kind of guy fall so fast? I mean, I think we're all fast. In fact, the whole idea of reality television, I think you kind of have to date it from the Simpson trial. I think after the Simpson trial, everything was reality. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, a lot of shows started, and I don't know when court TV began, but it probably was reasonably close to that time. So yes, I think that's true. You know, when you become a lovable figure in America, since we have no royalty, that is our royalty. And he was this lovable man who was adored by both races, so to speak, and someone who people really looked up to. So this was a shock to all of us. And there are many people who don't really believe that he committed that crime. Most people, of course, do. Certainly in the Caucasian community, they do. But there are a lot of things that came out that we should probably discuss.
Actually, excuse me, before we get into the case, I think we should set the tone about what LA was like in 1994. This is 2 years after the Rodney King beatings. The town is completely on tenterhooks regarding racism. The LAPD is considered to be the villain now. I mean, I always grew up in LA thinking the LAPD was a good police force, but after seeing the beating tapes of Rodney King, and then, of course, the riots that followed, the town was really torn in half. And, this all precedes the Simpson case, which, of course, as we know, racism gets into that case in a big way. So I think before we talk about, this case, we have to set the tone, and that pretty much shows you that this was a pile of dynamite ready to be lit once that case began.
But what you also need to understand is OJ Simpson's appeal before the murder took place was not was a mainstream. OJ Simpson crossed over into all kinds of things as a major league celebrity. As Julian mentioned, he had a likability factor. He was probably one of the, I'm going to just say half a dozen biggest celebrities in the United States. And I'm telling you, this guy had charisma. I met him several times personally in the Brentwood area. He was hobbling. Interesting. Football players, people take for granted that their career ends and then everything's fine. Their career ends and they usually got bad ankles or bad back or bad legs or something. And he was hobbling. But I was in the company of Dwight Hemian, a very famous television director, who had worked with OJ several times. That's how I got to meet him. Likeable that way too, all before this happened. But he was a major league celebrity, and there's no question that what Steve brings up is true. That happening, the Rodney King happening 2 years before that, lit a fuse that was always simmering, and it was blossomed. And along comes the OJ case. Now, what needs to be mentioned, I think, clearly, is if you go back to the time when it happened, and I can speak for myself and my family, it was unbelievable to think that OJ was involved. We heard that his wife was killed, and a guy who was a waiter at I think a Cheesecake Factory, if I'm not mistaken, in Brentwood, was killed in this thing, and she happened to be married at one time to OJ Simpson. But that was only part of the information that we had. But no, I've never put together that he could have done it at that moment. I don't think anybody did. And matter of fact, he was interviewed on television several times, and he was distraught and all of the rest of emotional things. But Steve, you as well, did you actually believe that he was involved when you first heard the news?
Well, there are so many things that came out that pointed in that direction. I mean, the thing that in rereading...
Not initially, Steve, not initially.
Not initially, but I think that one of the things that came out, and Julian, I know you raised your hand, you have a question. I just think that the fact that Nicole Simpson had been beaten up by OJ over the course of many months when they were married, all of this pre-murder information that they had decided not to bring up in the case too much. There was a big strategic move to avoid the abuse question and focus on the DNA evidence, which we can talk about. But it sounds like this was not a happy marriage by any means. And maybe on the outside they were able to portray it, but eventually she left him and got away from OJ. And I think he never forgave her for leaving him. But Julian, what were you going to say?
Well, I like the fact that you set the scene, Steve. The idea of the Rodney King beatings and the terrible racist riots made the reason the show, it was a show, but the courtroom case go downtown when it should have been tried in Santa Monica, where the murder, Santa Monica Brentwood place takes place, was a reaction to that. That's what the police and I think the prosecutor said, we better not make it a white trial. we better go downtown. And that was probably the best reason for doing it because of what was happening. On the other hand, the downtown area often was a lot of black people. And I think the majority of the folks on the jury were black. Is that right?
Yeah, there were 10 blacks, 2 whites, and then there was, I think, actually one white and I think one Hispanic. It's interesting. I was just reading just before our show began that when the verdict was announced that he was innocent, one of the jurors stood up and gave the Black Power salute to OJ. And it was thought that obviously the prosecution in analyzing whether this juror would be proper kind of fell down there. They should have eliminated that juror. But yeah.
But you're kind of ahead here. I think what we need to go back to is that, again, it happened on June 12, on the night of June 12, 1994. That's when the murders took place. Even then, at that time, this young fellow named Ron Goldman, who was murdered as well for just delivering some food there.
No, he wasn't delivering food.
Glasses.
Right. Yeah, I think the name of the restaurant, it wasn't California Pizza Kitchen. It was a restaurant called Mezza Luna. That was where I think Ron was working.
On San Vicente.
Right.
But here's what. On June 12, 94, when people like the world heard this, no one really associated with OJ Simpson except that he was married to her. But from June 12 to June 17 was the car chase. So there were 5 days that this thing percolated in the news. Couldn't miss it. It was out there, and it built and slowly and surely, and then it became maybe OJ did it, because of all these reasons you're pointing out. And then there was the car chase, which 9 zillion people watched. It was so big that they had a New York Knicks playoff game on, and they had it small, and they had the car chase, this 25-mile-an-hour car chase on the 405 onto Sunset Boulevard. That was 5 days later.
It's funny because it's the first time in my life I heard of a slow chase, and it was amazing. It's ironic. Elisa, my wife, and I had just returned from our honeymoon, and we were back at our condo. We decided to go to the movies that night. We decided to go see a movie called Speed. Turn on the radio, and we're listening to the slow chase on the radio. It was very ironic.
But as far as that chase is concerned, it was already out to the public that he had a gun, and he was in the back of the car. His friend AJ
Howling
was driving the car, or they were in touch with the news. Wow, you couldn't script this for a movie. And these are the things that were happening live in front of the public. Go back to the JFK assassination. All that stuff that happened beyond was live on television. And here comes OJ, I don't know how many years later, but it's live. And it's kind of unbelievable that it was now accepted that he had a gun in the back, was claiming he was going to shoot himself, that this guy may just have committed the murder. It took 5 days, but it got out there, and then everything went crazy beyond that point when he decided to get arrested. But everything was televised. Everything was on television. And so the public at large was familiar with what was going on, and it became quite an issue and became racial and became all kinds of things. Larry King had as his main topic every night for 9 months was the OJ Simpson trial. And unbelievable, but it happened.
It's the investigation that began shortly after the murders. And by the way, we should talk a little bit about the murders because some of the listeners today may not even have been born then. This was a very part of it was a terrible murder, very, very grisly murder. Somebody had practically chopped Nicole Brown's head off. I mean, her throat was slashed. Goldman was stabbed many times. It was the ultimate brutal murder, and the blood trails were there. And the police investigation was, they were all over this quickly. but there was some controversy as to where was OJ Simpson at that moment, and eventually, I guess he was on his way to a personal appearance in Chicago, and his limo driver pulled up to the mansion in Brentwood to pick him up, and there was no answer at the doors. He was driving around, and then there's all this story about the Bronco driving back, and Julian, you remember all this stuff, don't you?
I do, Steve. I do indeed. But I'm interested in obviously the majority of the people we all know believe he did it, and on the other side are some very interesting facts that I was able to ascertain. But I shouldn't use the word facts, because when you do research these days, especially on the web, you don't know how valid what you're reading is. So I can only tell you what I've found, and I can't stand behind it, and I don't think any of us can. But the first thing is that if you have a gun, why are you using a knife? If you own a gun, why are you using a knife? You know with a knife it's going to be a mess. And you're going to go to Chicago in a half hour later or 40 minutes later or something. That's kind of strange, but that's okay. The other thing that I decided was that in the few cases that I knew of besides OJ, and that's Phil Hartman and Gig Young, both of whom shot their wives, they also turned the gun on themselves. And that seems to be, in murder cases, supposedly, a very common thing, that in family where there's anger and jealousy and rage, the killer often kills the person and then kills themselves. Obviously, OJ didn't do that. If he did do the murders, he certainly didn't do that. Finally, in this area, I had a very close friend who ran the Z Channel in Los Angeles, which was a cable system that was very popular in the LA area. His name was Jerry Harvey, a very talented, really good guy, and he sadly did the same thing. He killed his wife, and then he turned it on himself. So that's another thing that can be brought up that I never heard brought up, but in researching, that's what I found. So there's a lot of things. I don't want to take that much time. I'll come back and give it to one of you guys, but there are other things that occurred that does give you a question mark about, are you 100% sure that this man did it? And
Well,
a lot of people,
Julian,
are, but I have to say, after doing my research, I wouldn't say I'm 100% sure.
Let's go back to what you were saying here with turning the guns. They had DNA. They had DNA from his blood. This case was open and shut, and they blew it. They absolutely fucked this case up. They did, but it was open. They had DNA. They had all kinds of things. His shoes, the blood on his clothes. There's always, I think, in everything you can make a case. My God, they made a case at Judgment at Nuremberg. One of the great movies of all time depicted the trial of what took place in Germany during the war. Well, a case was brilliantly made by the attorney for the Nazis. You can always make a case. Well, I think you kind of just did, but they had evidence up the kazoo.
So what does OJ Simpson do? When you get accused of murder, you of course have to hire an attorney to represent you. OJ Simpson, in the history of trials, probably had more lawyers than anybody in history. And not only were they lawyers, we're talking about some of the greatest defense lawyers in the history. F. Lee Bailey, my goodness, Robert Shapiro, Robert Kardashian,
Alan Dershowitz.
I mean, there's like 7 other guys. I mean, they proceeded during that 8 or 9 month trial to rip the prosecution's case to shreds. You know, you mentioned the DNA. They point out the contamination of of all of the evidence, and the stupidity of these police officers. And then they threw down the racism card with Mark Furman having planted this bloody glove behind
Absolutely. Steve, the fact is that these guys, it's a world that they know. We know our world, I think. They know their world. And in their world, there's tremendous precedence of all of these things happening. Somebody puts the blood thing in their pocket, a cop does, and he walks away. And then they found out that somewhere in Pittsburgh, 80 years ago, they got off with something like that just because the cop put something in his pocket. There's always a shred of something that the defense brings up and weighs in heavily on. And the glove thing was so stupid that they gave the glove, which is shrunk, and he had to put a plastic thing on his hand, and that became a big deal with the public because it caught. If the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Insanity. But the bottom line of this was, like so many conspiracies, there's a shred of truth to so many conspiracies. But by and large, I have to believe, like most people, he was guilty. He did it. He was in a rage, a jealous rage for a wife who was very attractive, I guess, very sexy looking, and thinking that she was making it with this guy who delivered the glasses. He went nuts and did it. But they have the blood at the crime. They had it on his shoes. They had it on his clothing. But they got away with it. Ultimately, they got away with it, whether it was because of the jury or whatever.
Planting evidence was brought up at the trial. And when Mark Furman was cross-examined by F. Lee Bailey, he was asked quite point blank, have you ever planted evidence? You know what Furman's answer was? I'm taking the fifth.
Because now, they do, yes.
The blood, there's a whole theory on the blood that there is a certain kind of thing that you put into blood on samples that stops it from coagulating. And ostensibly, the blood found, was his blood, and then his blood coagulated, which means that somebody planted blood, if that's the case. You can't have two kinds of blood of the same.
Julian, there's the cases all across the United States from hundreds of years where they have found that from time to time, a policeman or a detective will plant whatever they want to plant on the person. It's been done. There's always that shred of truth that goes into every conspiracy theory. And what's happened in today's day and age is conspiracy theories have run wild, completely wild, but there's always that shred of evidence. And that there's always, something has happened somewhere that actually did happen. But it doesn't pertain to the vast majority of cases that are basically open and shut. Yet the attorneys, that's their job, and they get paid very well. They got paid by OJ Simpson. Attorneys make sure they get paid before they act. That's where most of his money went. But he had a great team of attorneys, and they sat around and brainstormed, and they came up with all of these things which they're familiar with because that's their world. That's what they do.
To this day, we don't know the JFK assassination, the facts. And I say we don't know all the facts of OJ either. I don't think it's an open and shut case, number one. Number two, we know that Nicole's close friend, they vacationed together, they spent a lot of time together, was a woman named Faye Resnick. Faye Resnick, by her own admission, was a cocaine user. And supposedly the belief is, one of the many theories, was that they showed up to get money to pay off Faye's bill from Nicole. Supposedly, another theory is that Nicole called OJ and said, there are two guys outside here. You got to come over. I don't know what they want, what they're doing. I don't know what that's about, but you got to come over. So ostensibly, he went over to see what that was about. True, we don't know. A man walking his dog was sat down and gave to the police his version of what he had seen. He was walking his dog at the same time this is all taking place, and he sees one man, dark hair, talking to Nicole Simpson outside her condo. So the question is, why wasn't he called? He was not called. And 30 years later, he comes out and talks about the fact that he gave the testimony to the police, but the police never called him. So this goes on and on and on, as you said, Arthur. Conspiracy theories all over the place, but there's a lot that has to be questioned. And now I'll just jump to the Anita Hill case. For whatever the reason, Anita Hill had 2 or 3 women who wanted to testify about Clarence Thomas. And our ex-president, who was the head of the committee, Joe Biden at that time, would not let them testify. Why? I don't know. But that is fact. So what I'm trying to get to the point is that I don't believe it was an open and shut case. I believe there are many possibilities based on what I've read. Certainly it looks like an open and shut case, but that's my...
And my response to that, respectfully, is that when you get together a team of brilliant defense attorneys, these people are so good that they can, and that's why they were brought in, because they can make a case for anything. They can. There's always these little shreds of things that are around, and they know it. Again, that's their world. That's what they do. If you want to talk about movies, well, we're happy to talk about it. We've all been in it for many, many years. We know the business. But that's their world, and that's what they do, and they did a pretty good job for OJ.
A lot of the case, if not all the case, hinged on the DNA evidence. Interestingly, DNA was a relatively new thing in cases. It had been first introduced in 1986, 8 years before, but I don't think the public, your average Joe on the street, knew much about DNA. And the fact that it could have been contaminated certainly put a question in their head. And I'm thinking of the jurors. Today, if you have a jury pool and they tell them that there's DNA evidence that the killer was there, I think people accept that this is science, and it actually is, that's 1 in 90 billion that it isn't true. But back in 1995, I think that people weren't as assured that DNA was open and shut. So I think that's part of it. Here's one thing I always thought about with whether OJ was innocent or not. He's a media celebrity. I mean, this is a guy who's, a superstar from sports. He's making movies. If you're innocent of a crime, one of the biggest interviewers at that time was Barbara Walters. I invite Barbara Walters to come visit me, and I'll give her an exclusive interview that I didn't do it because I'm sincere, because I didn't do it. That never took place. He never had somebody come in and he explained to them categorically that he didn't do it. He never did that. And he was a media celebrity. I bet you if he had gone on national television in front of the whole country and said, I didn't do it, talking to somebody like a Barbara Walters, people would have believed him. But he never did that.
No question, he never did. And Arthur, what you're saying is also true. But, it is interesting. If he went over, if it's true that he got a call from his ex-wife and that these 2 guys were there, and then he fled the scene, he didn't protect his ex-wife, and he left, you really don't want to call talking about that. I mean, not if you're a man who has a whole different kind of image. So it's an interesting thing. And I'm fascinated by the conspiracy theories. They're all over the place. I was so surprised. I kind of thought I had given up on that with the JFK thing, but I didn't realize that 31 years later, they're still making films and still writing about it. And thinking about writing, the idea that he wrote a book, If I Did It, in itself is a little frightening to write a book like that. But he needed money, if you can say that. On the other hand, do we want to jump to the civil trial, or do you want to hang in there with the murder guys?
We're going to hang in for a little while longer. While this was happening, I don't know if you guys saw this, but it was on Los Angeles television on one of the news broadcasts to show you how crazy things can be. Steve, maybe you saw it at the time. they were doing a news broadcast, and so they showed OJ playing football for USC and running the ball into the end zone from maybe the 3-yard line. And he kind of like dove, he was diving in, and his face was right in the camera where they froze the shot. And you saw this look on his face of competitive, whatever, anger, rage that these guys come out with because they're playing a football game. And the news commentator, a woman, said, "Look at that. Look at his face. There it is. That's what we're talking about." In other words, she's claiming he's guilty because he's running over the goal line with a football. Those unbelievable. I want to get back to the thing about the trial. The trial, again, has anybody here or perhaps in our audience ever been interrogated in a deposition by a very good attorney? If you have been, you get to know how good these people are, men and women. They are brilliant at what they do. They can defend anything. That's how great they are. They can defend anything. We had a movie case in Boston, I'll tell you just briefly, which is about as open and shut as you could possibly get. A distributor comes into town. He has a kiddie show, and he has every theater in town plays the kiddie show except one theater. One theater is not allowed because a big theater chain had a theater 3 miles away, and they blocked it from happening. So the exhibitor sues. But the distributor he sues was an ex-Marine. And the ex-Marine calls in to defend him for what was indefensible. A guy named John Henry Johnson, who was one of the toughest guys I've ever seen. I was a film buyer for the little exhibitor, and I had to go for deposition against this guy who was not F. Lee Bailey, but was associated with F. Lee Bailey. This was the toughest 10 minutes I've ever seen in my life. He made it seem like the guy who was claiming that how could you do this to me was guilty for how could he possibly? Well, that's what they do. That's their job. And they're great at it. They could even defend the OJ Simpson case. I believe in the evidence. I believe the evidence proved that he was guilty. I do believe that. I think most people do. But they got him off. Unbelievable. No, Johnny Cochran became a movie star from this. Oh, my God, incredible.
Money. When it comes to trials, if you've got the money, the chances are you're going to do a lot better than some schmo who only can deal with the, what do they call the court-appointed attorney? The,
court-appointed attorney.
They call, thank you. They get the court-appointed attorney who has 15 minutes to solve the case.
Well, one more thing, Steve, if I may, before we get to the civil trial, if you will, Julian, is how this case ran so long, how it became a national, international showbiz event. Jay Leno had the dancing Itos for the judge, and the judge, who was a starfucker, would bring in celebrities so they could be in the court. All these big movie stars would want to come, and Lance Ito would take care of him. He loved, oh my God, movie stars, isn't this great? It was insanity that overwhelmed. Well, and people who forgot this poor guy, Ron Goldman, he was like an aside to the thing. This poor guy went and delivered glasses that he was bringing, got killed.
No, his
family represented him passionately and well, but what a terrible thing that happened.
And some of the characters that came out of it was like a movie. Kato Kalin, I don't even think he would be considered a B actor. He was like a D- actor. Suddenly is being mentioned, as much as Tom Cruise is being mentioned, and he just happened to be renting a room in Simpson's house. And he was there on the night of the murder. He heard a bump in the backyard, and that's when it was thought that Simpson showed up and went out to greet his limo driver. He was now on his way to Chicago. And, oh, my goodness, these characters.
And Steve Kato Kalin became a big celebrity.
Yeah, I mean, he was probably, if they had the Hollywood squares on in those days, he was probably one of the... I
may have told you guys a story, but it's a true story. I'm sitting in an agent's office on Wilshire Boulevard with Milton Berle, and a couple other guys. And Milton was up there talking. But anyway, we're going to go to dinner afterwards. And a secretary comes in and says, Cato, this is while it was all happening. Cato Kalin is here, and he heard Milton Berle was here. He'd like to say hello to Milton Berle. Is it okay? Someone says, yeah, bring him in. So he comes in, Cato Kalin. Oh, my God, Milton Berle is so great. And here's Cato Kalin at the height of his celebrity. And he sticks out his hand to shake Milton's hand. And Milton takes off his own pinky ring before he shakes his hand. I'm telling you, we collapsed. It was, it's just an aside. But yeah, people became celebrities. Marcia Clark, a celebrity. Chris Darden, an attorney, a celebrity.
And
they all wrote books and made money, and it was crazy.
But you guys are forgetting the most important name. A guy whose last name was Kardashian.
Bobby
At
Kardashian.
that point, no one knew the Kardashians.
That's right. That's true.
What started the name of the Kardashians. I spent some time with F. Lee Bailey, and we should just let the audience know, those who don't know, as we've mentioned, huge attorney who defended the Boston Strangler, who defended Patty Hearst, who defended Sam Shepard. I mean, he had the trials of the century, not just OJ, but those other three were gigantic, not as big, but quite big. Certainly Patty Hearst was huge. And what I found with F. Lee Bailey, he truly believed, or I believe he believed, there was no reason to sell me, that this was years and years later that OJ was an innocent man in this case. He also wrote a book. I never read it, but it supposedly pointed out some of the things that the prosecutors suppressed and they found out later. But again, I don't know about that. That so much of this is what Arthur called the conspiracy theories, and it's true. There are so many of them. But to meet F. Lee Bailey was to meet, as Arthur was saying earlier, one of the smartest men I ever sat down with. And because I was doing an extensive interview with him about all his law cases, it was a tennis game when you find yourself lucky enough to be playing with a pro and you realize your game has gotten better because he's the one serving. He was terrific. It's a wonderful interview, and I hope one day to be able to show it. So that's my story.
You mentioned Bobby Kardashian. I happened to meet him, too, on one of the visits that OJ came over to our table at the Daily Grill in Brentwood. Steve, you know where that is.
Of course.
And Kardashian, who was friends with OJ, they were together. They came over to say hello to Dwight. And I happened to be there with Dwight, and so we met. Again, on surface, OJ was a huge celebrity. I mean, everybody looks at OJ Simpson as that. This is before all this happened. And Bobby Kardashian was, just with him, totally likable guy. And I always remember Kardashian's look when he was found innocent. He was like ashen. He couldn't believe it. Hey, look, so you look at somebody, you say, look at the look. It's like that, the girl on television saying, look at his look of anger and going over the goal line. How stupid that was. But, these things get out there and the public at large, we were all involved with that trial. I think who could have not focused their attention on that trial for at once, twice, or 100 times? It was just in our lives. It was in the ethos
when they announced the verdict, the city of Los Angeles, you could hear a pin drop in the city. I mean, every office, it was the water usage that day went down at that moment. Nobody went to the bathroom. It was incredible. It was probably maybe the most watched moment in American history live. I mean, obviously the Kennedy assassination was one thing, but this was in 1990 America, 1994 America, and everybody was waiting for it. I was working at Showtime at the time, and I remember the entire office gathered around the television. And when they announced the verdict, it was truly shocking. I think, at least in my office, everybody thought he was guilty of sin.
We were talking to Stephen it was October 3, 1995, when he was declared innocent. And my wife and I were talking about our son's upcoming bar mitzvah. And in that kind of a nice, happy, serious conversation, all of a sudden it's announced that he was innocent. And it even stopped our conversation about the bar mitzvah of, my God, really? And, the look of Johnny Cochran. Talk about a guy who became a superstar at that time. Johnny Cochran, who was really a showbiz kind of agent. He really became a big celebrity, a big star out of it.
Yeah, but he also talked a lot on his cell phone, apparently, and he died of a brain tumor shortly thereafter.
God, that not long after, yes.
Not long after. I mean, I'm not paranoid about holding a phone to my ear, but apparently when you do it nonstop like Johnny Cochran did, it can cause problems. And again, I don't know if that's what killed him, but yeah, no. I think the prosecution made some terrific strategic errors in this case. Even the question of OJ putting on the glove in the courtroom, I think Marcia Clark originally decided, no, we won't do that. And I think Christopher Darden all of a sudden announced that he was going to put on the glove in the courtroom. And that probably killed their case right there. That glove.
But he had a plastic thing on his hand before he put the glove on. So of course the glove wasn't going to fit.
The latex glove.
The latex glove.
Right,
Yeah.
but the glove had been sitting around for months, and it had been blood encrusted. It probably shrank. I mean, it was terrible.
There was also the aspect of this, let us not forget, of the really sad family of Ron Goldman, and specifically his father, who was so distraught, but was always in front of the cameras, rightfully so, making the case for his son. And, he's like a forgotten part of what took place. And Nicole Simpson had sisters. This was in the news every day from June 12, 1994 to the trial began on January 13, 95. And on October 3, 95, he was declared innocent. And many, many months afterwards did this remain in our presence. But for those days, you got a year and a half. You're talking about OJ every day. I spoke with Larry King. He said it never happened where you could cover something day in and day out, and the ratings were humongous every day for 9 months. What a topic!
As I said at the top of the show, I really think that it was the beginning of these reality shows covering every aspect of human life, and it's such a part of Hollywood television these days. I think it begins not directly then, certainly during that period. But then OJ's freed, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Fred Goldman, the father, who starts to initiate the civil trial or civil case against Simpson. And that case, Simpson loses.
Oh, he loses in Santa Monica big time.
Big time.
It was held. There wasn't even a close. But I want to say,
Julian, excuse me one second. That's 1997. That's 2 years later is when that trial takes place.
Okay. And what I was going to say was that often when he was declared innocent, and as you said, we would be talking about it in groups and stuff. I had a different theory than most people, which I obviously have tonight too, or this afternoon, whenever this is being listened to. And that is the fact that I can't think of, even the Greeks couldn't think of a bigger tragedy than to have someone beloved now walking around free, being yelled at murderer and being spit at. He was actually spit at airports. He was a pariah. And maybe if he did do it, that's the worst kind of punishment of all. Worse than anything.
Julian, while that was happening, he was also signing autographs for a lot of autograph seekers. Believe it or not.
Both. But where he wanted it, what he wanted, what he had, what he needed was this adulation. And he had lost a lot of it, if not most of it. So it's an interesting way of looking at it. Okay, want to go to the civil trial. As I say, Santa Monica now, probably an all-white jury. I don't know, but I'm assuming. And he's found guilty on every which way. And I think he serves 8 or 9 years in jail, doesn't he?
No, Julian, he didn't serve. And
No?
you don't serve jail for civil. Civil trial, no jail. He just got penalized millions and millions and millions of dollars, which I don't think he ever paid. I don't think he had it.
Well,
Julian,
He wound up going to jail in
didn't he go to jail for
Julian,
stealing?
you're talking about another case.
2008.
Yeah, he was convicted of breaking into somebody's hotel room with a group of guys to steal back some memorabilia he claimed had been stolen from him, and he was convicted of crime, right, Arthur?
Yes, and they put him away for years for what was not that big a crime, but they were like laying for it.
I think that was the 9 years I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there were 3 trials.
Yes. Well, the third one, but like Steve says, had nothing to do with what happened.
It was civil. It was civil.
He took some guys in with him to retrieve what he believed was his memorabilia, a lot of shirts, whatever, and he was put away for years for that. And then got out down here in Miami area and played golf every day. And he was around, and it's just an ongoing story. But his fame really began at college at USC, and from that day forward, he was always famous. One reader, and then became infamous. But what a story,
Arthur. I wonder how many young men were named OJ based on his success as a sporting figure. I'm wondering how many young men changed their names after the trial, because it's no longer considered to be a badge of rank to be called OJ, but I think almost a pariah, as you point out.
You know what the OJ stood for, Steve?
Orenthal James, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was his production company, Orenthal Production. Yeah. He was also, we didn't mention, he was in Roots. He was in Cassandra Crossing. He did have a film career and a television career.
Towering Inferno, Julian. Wow.
Yep.
Big hit.
And as we said, 3 Naked Gun films.
He played
and all over television.
Yeah.
He was a star. And that Hertz commercial was every minute, every day was on there somewhere and running through airports.
That's why he was going to Chicago. I think it was part of the golf tournament for Hertz, I believe. It was interesting. He made a terrible movie with 2 great movie stars, Richard Burton and Lee Marvin. It was called The Klansman. And it was there that he started, he said, to take acting seriously because he saw how good they were as actors. So put that in pipe.
Funny thing about this is, he became a movie star, became a big celebrity movie star. And as he was number 2 to Jim Brown in terms of being the greatest running back of all time, Jim Brown set the stage when he did Dirty Dozen, which came out, I think, in 1967. Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's absolutely right, Arthur.
And Jim Brown was fantastic in this movie. And believe me, OJ Simpson would have been just as fantastic. So Jim Brown set the table, and OJ Simpson came afterwards. But they both had big careers in
But OJ did a different thing. OJ never made a black exploitation film. And Jim Brown.
That's true. Yes.
It's interesting. We talk about security these days and Brentwood mansions. Today, if you go to a Brentwood mansion, the odds are you're going to see a bunch of video cameras everywhere. Back in 1994, that was not a thing. I have a feeling that if you committed that kind of crime today, your crime would be caught on video cameras somewhere in those neighborhoods. And it's interesting, with people having cell phone cameras these days, everybody is a witness. So if there's anybody listening to this broadcast who wants to commit murder, you're going to be found.
Steve, I have to say this. I had a friend of mine, his name was Mark, in Brentwood. He owned the news stand right next to Whole Foods, which our audience may not be familiar with, but I know you are, Steve, and Julian, you may be.
Arthur, I missed that stand. It closed about 10 years ago.
I know. But Mark, he did very well there. Believe me, the guy was making $200,000 a year off that stand. But on that stand, he had the camera, he had the video for his stand to make sure no one was robbing him or all that kind of stuff. Right across the street was the restaurant that they came out of. Not the Gaucho Grill, but there was Mezzaluna. And so the cop showed up 5 days later. They looked at the stand and they said, you have a camera up there. Could we see what you got? He says, yeah, of course. He said, but it's only 24 hours. I always erase it after at 24 hours. There would have been evidence that they were in that certain place at a certain time. And Mark, was, what can he do? He only had it. Now it's digital, so they have it forever. But you're right. There's cameras all over the place. And yet, something, with cameras all over, they still haven't caught that guy who had the pipe bomb on January 6th. He had a hood on. He's still gone free. With all of the cameras they haven't been walking, but they don't know who he is. What a story, guys! OJ Simpson, the OJ days, 19, incredibly, as we began 31 years ago. But it seems kind of fresh, doesn't it?
I think Marcia Clark later left law, and I think she's now a successful writer. And I think she has her own podcast. I think she's written several books. Everybody associated with that cast of characters really wrote books.
She was pretty good at that trial. She was pretty effective.
But I think she was a little outclassed by the defense. I mean, it looked like the New York Yankees of 1927 playing a minor league ball club.
Well, think of the Dream Team basketball that played in the Olympics. Who was going to beat them?
Who was going to beat them?
Michael Jordan, Larry Bird. That's the Dream Team he had, as Julian mentioned earlier, with F. Lee Bailey and Alan Dershowitz and those guys.
Oh, sure.
It's
Dream Team.
It is believed in the 2020 hindsight that we seem to work in that the prosecution messed up much more than the defense was great.
They did.
And certainly the defense was great. I'm not saying it wasn't, but it was the prosecution that really messed up.
Well, they made a tactical decision not to bring up the abuse question. There was a lot of evidence that OJ had been an abuser, which in today's court trials becomes a major issue.
Well, he beat her up. That was true.
Well, he was arrested. Yeah.
I mean, we were aware of it, so I don't remember. Was it from media, not the court? Are you saying, Steve? It wasn't.
Yeah, because I read that Marcia Clark's decision was to focus on the They felt they had the case with the DNA evidence. They felt it was an iron shut case. So they decided not to bring up the abuse element. And that was a major tactical blunder on their part because the DNA evidence was not incontrovertible, or whatever that word is.
Incontrovertible.
Thank you.
Let's do this, guys, as we're going to be signing off pretty soon. We're four of us sitting here. Julian, you've made a statement. Do we believe that he was guilty or not? And let's start with you, Steve.
Well, I base my whole feeling about OJ's innocence on the fact he did not give that interview. And he was a smart guy in terms of knowing what
if you were on the jury, how would you have voted?
I would have voted guilty.
Mike, how about yourself?
That's a good question because I have my own theories and I didn't want to interrupt you guys because you guys were so fantastic.
Well, what is your theory?
Oh, theory is, truthfully, and because this is one of the running ones, is OJ was covering for his son.
Well, that happens to be the number one on the web. That's the number one that is used as the reason that it happened. That it was his son, not him.
Right.
How old was his son at the time?
His son was in his early 20s at the time.
And there was a big party that was held for OJ, and the son supposedly invited Nicole, and Nicole did not come. And he was angered by this. He also supposedly, and I keep saying supposedly, because for all I'm reading, was that he had a lot of mental issues, the young man.
Exactly. And the kid was big, just like OJ was. And so
you actually believe, Mike, that he did it? The son?
I do, truthfully.
Oh, okay.
That's my theory. And, I wasn't a kid when this happened. I was mid-20s when this had happened. And so, I did my research on it and, being, most of us are parents. And so I would do anything for my kid. And if my kid did something like this and, I think OJ took the fall for his kid.
So if you were on the jury, you would have voted not guilty.
Yes.
Julian?
I don't know what I would have done because I wasn't on the jury. But I definitely have my doubts. I would never say guilty at this point. I would like to if we could go back and introduce people who weren't introduced, evidence that wasn't shown, the idea that many things on that case were sloppily done, including, I read, I don't know how true this is, there was blood on the shoes that were never not tested. So the idea that different kinds of blood was found, the idea that evidence has been known to be put down and that didn't, to make the case. It's a lot of questions on it. So I don't know. I sound like I'm equivocating, but I don't know. I'd have to.
So if you're on the jury, you would have done it. I don't know. Which
If
could have got him off.
If I was on the jury, I'd say, "Get me off this case."
Well, but if you don't have the answer, I guess that's a hung jury, isn't it?
Yes, that's true. I don't know, Arthur. I mean, I don't think it's an open and shut case. That I don't think. I really
agree
don't.
with.
I would have voted guilty, and I would have voted to have the attorneys for the defense get the Oscar for being great attorneys, because they were brilliant, and they proved it.
No, I agree.
Back to you, Mike.
No, it's interesting because, it was the dream team, like you said, Arthur. This, it was the dream team for defense attorneys. And, there was just so much weirdness around this whole thing. So, this is, like you said, over 30 years ago. I don't think we'll ever know the true story.
It's worth repeating as we go out. If we don't know, if a lot of people out there don't know the history of Nuremberg and what took place, you can look at the movie and you can see that in the portrayal of the defense attorney by Maximilian Schell, that a case can be made for anything by looking at that movie, for anything. He didn't win the case, but nonetheless, he made one hell of a case.
He won the Oscar.
And he did win the Oscar. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, that's the OJ story. Michael?
Thank you, my friends. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. You could write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could also find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and you could even find us up on YouTube. If you made it this far into this episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? That's how the algorithms find us, and, more people like and subscribe. The more people who, our numbers grow, other people find us and go, my God, these three men are geniuses. So there you go. If you're into social media, please check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys see what's happening on their podcast. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
Oh, the fine actress Jane Alexander, who has such wonderful credits and played Eleanor Roosevelt in a couple of wonderful movies and probably has the record. I don't know this. I'm going to check it out, but I think has the record of being nominated with the shortest amount of time on screen. She was 4 minutes with Dustin Hoffman on All the President's Men and was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress.
That is awesome. Yep. That is cool. Steve, what's cooking over on Saturday night at the movies? Are you guys back?
We're back. We have Bob Hertzberg, who is a prolific author and historian. He's written 12 books, including The Third Reich on Screen, Hollywood and the Military Bureaucracy, and Organized Murder and Mob Rule in American Film, 1904 to 2024. So we have a rather eclectic show that night talking all about various aspects of film history with Bob Hertzberg.
Oh, very much so. That's very cool. Arthur, who are we talking to next week on our show?
I expect we're going to be talking with actress, singer, comedian Marilyn Michaels, who came a yard away from being a superstar. Marilyn Michaels is in her early 80s, and she was great. She happened to be in the Catskills on Broadway along with the three other guys in a big hit show. But Marilyn Michaels is a super talent, and we'll have great showbiz stories to tell. And we look forward to doing that with her, hopefully next week.
That is awesome. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We will see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Winter is coming. Prepare with a fine cigar and listen to the Cigar Nerds Podcast. We smoke cigars and talk about movies and all kind of nerdy things. Available at cigarnerdpodcast.com. Also on the ESO Network at esonetwork.com.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.